Greetings, true believers, and welcome to another temporal episode of History of the Marvel Universe. The Time Variance Authority, or TVA, is a bureaucratic agency dedicated to observing and policing the vast expanse of timelines in the multiverse. Unknown in origin, the TVA operates out of a null time zone that exists separate from normal space-time. From there, a near-infinite number of faceless chronomonitors observe the timelines. Each timeline has its own chronomonitor, and when events of significant importance are observed, new timelines may be created to observe the possible consequences of those events. In these cases, new chronomonitors are automatically generated to coincide with the new timelines. However, when time travel or reality warping occurs, the chronomonitors will make a report via faster-than-light tachyon pulse to one of the TVA's administrators. For example, the supervisor who typically interacts with the timeline of the main Marvel Comics universe is Mr. Mobius M. Mobius. There are of course many others, including Mr. Ouroboros, Mr. Tesseract, and Mr. Paradox, all of whom are exact genetic clones of one another and bear a striking resemblance to Marvel editor Mark Gruenwald. Although their highest-ranking manager, Mr. Alternity, has been shown to more closely resemble Tom DeFalco. In events of egregious temporal manipulation, the TVA supervisors may decide to intervene by sending their cybernetic soldiers, the Minutemen. The Minutemen are in turn led by the Justices, TVA officers with the authority to navigate the various time streams and punish infractions. There are many such officers, but the one most well known to our timeline is Justice Peace. Peace was originally a member of the federal police force from a future timeline where the city of Brooklynopolis stretched across America and the Earth was entering its 7th World War. He was initially brought on as a freelancer, but later joined the TVA on a more permanent basis. Other TVA justices include Liberty, Truth, Might, Goodwill, Hope, and perhaps at least two named Love. The TVA has also employed various freelance peacekeepers, such as the robotic mercenary known as Death's Head. Death's Head is an interesting case as he first achieved notoriety operating in an alternate timeline version of the Transformers universe before being shrunk down to a more human size by the 7th Doctor from Doctor Who. And if any of this is beginning to sound like insane fanfiction, let me reiterate that this is all 100% canon. And that's not even addressing the fact that Justice Peace is a clear homage to 2080's Judge Dredd. Anyway, when agents of the Time Variance Authority apprehend temporal criminals, the guilty party is held captive in a time loop until it's decided how best to proceed. In some instances, a perpetrator may even be erased from history with a weapon known as the retroactive cannon. So this may leave some wondering why we haven't seen the TVA intervene with the Marvel Universe we're most familiar with, Earth 616, more often. After all, that universe has abused time travel so often they nearly broke the entire space-time continuum once. Well, to fully explain that, we need to first look at another timeline, reality number 8810. In this universe, an extremely powerful alien entity known as Tiamat, the Dreaming Celestial, forced the World Eater Galactus to become a living black hole which warped space and time around it. After being expelled from the ranks of the other Celestials for unspecified crimes, Tiamat intended to erase all of reality, including his celestial brethren, and begin anew. And when the black hole began to cause time warps, the TVA took notice and attempted to intervene. However, they inadvertently made the problem worse, creating a time bubble that spanned 15 years. The time bubble acted as a temporal barrier, preventing time travelers from entering or crossing that 15-year period. However, it also spanned the entirety of cross-time, meaning it affected every timeline in the multiverse. Which is how the Fantastic Four from Earth 616 became aware of its existence during their own experiments with time travel. With the help of Thor and Iron Man, the FF were able to successfully penetrate the time bubble and enter Universe 8810 to investigate. After discovering the ultimate source of the trouble, the heroes were able to bring Galactus to his senses long enough for him to use a cosmic weapon called the Ultimate Nullifier to erase that universe, saving the rest of Cross-Time and effectively destroying the time bubble. The heroes of course escaped, and after further adventures in the time stream, the Fantastic Four were later arrested by the Time Variance Authority. However, the FF were able to escape, and Mr. Fantastic infected the TVA's computer system with a virus that unregistered their timeline with the TVA. So the Time Variance Authority's power is not without limits, and they have made peace with notably powerful time travelers, such as Kang the Conqueror. In fact, the realm of known time has been mapped, confirming that while the TVA hold considerable jurisdiction over the history of Cross-Time, other organizations and dynasties hold sway over time as well. You may recall from our video about the children of the Scarlet Witch that Immortus, the older and more contemplative future version of Kang the Conqueror, was given authority to watch over the 7 millennia period between 3000 AD and the 40th century by the enigmatic trio known as the Timekeepers. Naturally, this section of Cross-Time overlaps with the TVA's own governance over the time stream, which extends further into the future than any others. In fact, the Timekeepers themselves have their origins rooted in the future of the Time Variance Authority. You see, at the very end of time, in the final converging endpoint of every surviving timeline, there existed, or rather there will exist, a being known only as He Who Remains, the very last director of the Time Variance Authority. With the universe nearing its end, He Who Remains will decide to create a triad of beings capable of persevering into the next universal cycle as a gift for the future. However, these new beings were born flawed, and instead of traveling forward into the new timeline, they moved backwards through time, seeking the origins of the universe, but causing untold death and destruction as they did. Because of the damage caused to the time stream, this trio was dubbed the Time Twisters by the TVA. The TVA weren't the only ones to take notice of the Time Twisters, and their path was charted by another time traveler, Zarko the Tomorrow Man. Zarko was an evil scientist from the 23rd century who traveled forward in time and conquered Earth in the 50th century. Observing the future through his time scope, the Tomorrow Man learned that, as the Time Twisters spiraled backwards down time, their path intersected with Earth every 30 centuries, with disastrous consequences. And so, after witnessing the destruction of the 80th century, Zarko determined that his 50th century would be next, and enlisted aid from the 20th century, his former enemy, the mighty Thor. While they were unable to defeat the Time Twisters in the 50th century, Thor suggested they travel forward in time to before the Time Twisters were created. There, at the end of time, Thor's ally, Jane Foster, convinced He Who Remains to terminate the Time Twisters before they were born. This effectively reset the damage done by the Time Twisters and restored the timelines they had affected. But rather than abandon his goals, He Who Remained attempted to perfect his methods and gave birth to a new trio. It was this group of three that would become the Timekeepers, Vort, Xanth, and Ast. However, this altering of time created one final divergence in the time stream at the end of the universe. After the converging of every timeline into a single point, there was a final split into two possibilities. One where the Timekeepers were born, and one where the Time Twisters were created, both vying for their timeline to be the dominant one. And so while the Timekeepers were more benevolent than the Time Twisters in their attempt to preserve the time stream, they were also biased towards nurturing timelines that ensured their own survival and dominance. And of course, because of the nature of time travel and cross-time, the Timekeepers and the Time Twisters have interacted with Immortus, the TVA, and each other at various points throughout history. In fact, at one point, the Time Twisters successfully supplanted the Timekeepers, impersonating them to use Immortus in one of their schemes. Their plan was to turn Immortus into a living receptacle for Nexus power, basically energy from beings with the power to alter the course of space-time, the Scarlet Witch for example. With enough Nexus power stored up, Immortus became a temporal wave capable of rewriting the multiverse as the Time Twisters saw fit. Fortunately, Uatu the Watcher and the Time Variance Authority worked together to come up with a plan to stop the Immortus wave. By sending a parallel version of the Fantastic Four to an earlier point in Immortus's life, they were able to inject him with a compound which would render him incapable of storing the necessary Nexus power, and thus destroying the Immortus wave. The Timekeepers then regained their dominance and reverted the Time Twisters back to their prenatal pod forms, returning them to the Citadel at the end of time. However, the Timekeepers would eventually meet their own end at the hands of Kang the Conqueror during the climax of the Destiny War. While Kang is a younger version of Immortus from earlier in his life, because of the meddling of the Timekeepers, this Kang actually diverged from his personal timeline and may never actually become Immortus. And if that sounds confusing, don't worry, I'm sure we'll cover Kang and the Destiny War in more detail someday. One final note on the TVA. At one point, the Time Variance Authority designed a series of robots called incinerators, meant to clean up the cosmic debris that accumulates in the time lanes. However, the Authority lost control of the incinerators when their faulty programming caused them to set about incinerating the space-time continuum. For a time calling themselves the Dreadloks, the incinerators were pursued by Professor Justin Alphonse Gamble, a former TVA employee and doctor who absconded with one of the Authority's time machines. You know, there's something about this time-traveling doctor that seems vaguely familiar. Well, anyway, that's all we've got time for this week, but thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like, share the video, and subscribe for more marvelous content. Be sure to leave a comment letting me know what Marvel hero or villain you want to hear about next, and as always, the issues referenced in this video are listed in the description below if you would like to read them for yourself, as well as links to other places you can find me, including my Patreon page where for only $1 a month you can get your name in these special thanks here. So until next time, true believers, Excelsior!